Hello and welcome to Topic 5, Lecture 2. And in this lecture, we are going to be learning about the elements of the crime. All right, so for this week, you're going to be reading the first half of Chapter 4. And next week, you're going to read the second half of Chapter 4. So for this week, you're going to be thinking like a prosecutor. Okay, so that, we're learning about criminal law and the elements of the crime. And this week, we're learning about it from the prosecutor's perspective. And so, from what I mean by that is that for a prosecutor to convict someone of a crime, they must prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of the crime. And that's what we're going to focus on in this lecture. Now, next week, you're going to be like seeing the criminal law through the eyes of the defense attorney, raising doubt about the elements of the crime. So you'll be learning about criminal defenses next week. And so, so you'll be learning about the excuse and the justification defenses. And so that's what we've got on the docket for today, but also for next week. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so as I mentioned on the previous slide, for a prosecutor to get a conviction, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of the crime. So what are the elements of a crime? Well, the first element is that the prosecutor has to prove that the person charged with the crime actually engaged in a criminal act. In other words, that they engaged in actus reus, the guilty act. The next thing that the prosecutor has to prove is that they have to prove that the accused had the intent to commit the act. In other words, that the accused possessed mens rea, or what is known as the guilty mind. And what it means to possess the guilty mind means that a person that they committed the crime in a knowingly and in an intentional manner, okay? And so that the crime was committed knowingly and intentionally, okay? And so that you have to prove that the person who committed this criminal act basically knew what they were doing and that there was some intent behind their action. You also have to prove that the defendant's actions, that is the person accused of the crime, that those actions were actually the proximate cause of the injury, okay? And so that you have to prove that there was a relationship between the action and the injury that was a result of that action, okay? And so that the action is the immediate or in close relationship with the injury that's related to the actus reus, that's related to that criminal act. And then you have to show that actual harm was caused, okay? So, 4 elements: actus reus, mens rea, that the causation, that the defendant's actions were the cause of injury, and that there was actual harm that took place, okay? So that's a listing of the elements of the crime. Let's go into each of these in a lot more detail. Okay, so let's start with actus reus, the guilty act. The first thing you want to keep in mind is that you can't charge people for criminal thoughts. You can only charge them for criminal acts. So you can sit around all day long in your house and think about all of the criminal acts that you want to commit. That is not a crime, okay? We do not live in the dystopian future world that was created by George Orwell in the great book 1984, where in that case, that if you were thinking about a crime and mumbling about it in your sleep, then you could be arrested. Criminal thoughts are not crimes. But once you put those thoughts into action, then that can become a criminal act. And so words are actions. So if you're thinking about a crime and then you articulate that you're going to do that. So let's say I'm thinking about killing my neighbors because they're too noisy and their dogs never stop barking. That's one thing. Thinking about it, that's not a crime. But if I run outside and I start screaming at my neighbors and I tell them, I'm going to kill you because your dogs, are so noisy, right? And if it's truly a threat, then that could be a crime. If you lie in certain circumstances, right? Those are words, and lying, particularly perjuring yourself in a court of law, that's a crime. If you're writing a note, an email to somebody, and you're conspiring together to commit a crime, that is action, okay? And so that you can't be charged for thoughts, but only for actions, and words themselves, and the written word, that can be considered an action. The act actually must be a crime, okay? And so keep in mind that we were talking about the concept in our last lecture about substantive criminal law, the law that defines crime. And so for a person to be charged with an act, that you can't just charge somebody for doing something harmful. That harmful behavior actually has to be defined in state or federal statute as a crime. So for example, you could fake an illness. As far as I know, that is not a crime, at least not in the state of Wisconsin. You could pretend that you're sick in order to get sympathy from your boss, days off of work, sympathy for your friends. You know, maybe people will do things for you because, oh, you're sick. But that's not a crime, okay? Now, if you fake an illness and then you apply for certain benefits for ill people, now that's a crime, that's fraud, that's an action. And so until they change the law, making faking an illness a crime, that is not actus reus. The action has to be voluntary, okay? And so that, in other words, a person has to actually know that they're engaging in an act for it to be actus reus. So for example, let's say that you have a seizure, and in particular, let's say that you don't even know that you have seizures, okay? But even if you did, let's say that you're sitting in your classroom, in a face-to-face classroom, and then you have a seizure, and in the process of having a seizure, you basically hit the student who's sitting next to you. That's not assault because it was not a voluntary action, okay? You know, this might remind you of Kenneth Parks, because remember, that was the guy who was sleepwalking. What he did was not voluntary. He didn't choose to do it. And so that can't be considered a guilty act. Do keep in mind that the guilty act can include failure to not act, okay? So inaction can actually be actus reus. Inaction can. And that's in particular if there's a legal requirement that you do act. So for example, spouses have a legal requirement to act if their spouse is in danger. So if I came home and heaven forbid, Mike was having a heart attack, right? And I just was like, screw it. I'm not going to call 911. I've just committed I'm guilty act, right? That's actus reus. I have a legal obligation to get help for my spouse, okay? So actus reus includes failure to act. If you're a lifeguard, if you have a statutory requirement or there's a contractual relationship and you fail to act, that's actus reus. Okay, so how does a prosecutor prove actus reus? Well, the first thing a prosecutor needs to do is they need to look at the criminal statute, and then they need to take a look at what's actually what is the definition of the crime, okay? So if you charge somebody with, let's say, aggravated assault, you look in the statute and then you see what constitutes aggravated assault, okay? That's the first step. The second step is that you need to prove that the person you charged is actually the person that engaged in the act. So you have to make sure that the act itself is a crime and that the person engaged in these different aspects of the crime, the way that it's defined in statute. And so as a part of proving that you've got the right person, that you actually charged, that the person you charged is the person who committed the actus reus, there's lots of different things a prosecutor could do to prove that, right? That if there's any forensics, that let's say that you've charged somebody with murder, right? Then you would look at forensics. Is there any of the criminally accused's DNA at the site of the crime? Are there fingerprints? Is there any video surveillance that shows somebody coming in and out at the time that the crime was committed? Are there any eyewitnesses? Did this person confess? Okay. And so these are all the things that a prosecutor can do to make sure that the person, to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt to the jury that the person that's charged with the crime is actually the person who committed the actus reus. So proving actus reus beyond a reasonable doubt is not enough to convict somebody of a crime. You also have to prove that that individual who engaged in the criminal act, that they possessed mens rea, that they possessed the criminal or the guilty mind. And so for an act to be criminal, the person must have intended to commit the crime, okay? Committing the crime itself is not enough. You have to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that the person who committed this criminal act did so in a knowingly, willingly, reckless manner or with forethought, and also with forethought if possible. Okay. All of these indicate that they kind of intended that the action that they engaged in, they intended to engage in that action. Okay. And so that without demonstrating that the person possessed the guilty mind, they cannot be convicted of a crime. Now, mens rea is legally present even in reckless and negligent behavior. When we think of reckless and negligent behavior, it's sort of like, hey, you didn't intend to engage in this criminal act. But just because you didn't intend to do it doesn't mean that you didn't possess mens rea. Reckless is more serious than negligent. Okay. Here's an example to sort of think about the difference between reckless and negligent. Okay, and the example involves a baby. Okay, so let's say that you are watching a baby or babysitting a baby. Okay, and then let's say that you have the baby and you're throwing it up in the air like woo woo woo, right? And the baby is coming really close to the ceiling, right? And everybody's like, stop that, right? Don't do that. The baby could hit their head on the ceiling. And then he kept doing it, baby hit their head on the ceiling, and then the baby was concussed and, engaged, there was some harm to the baby. That's reckless behavior, right? Anybody knows that you shouldn't throw a baby up so high into the air that it's going to hit its head on the ceiling. That's reckless, and that even though you didn't intend to harm the baby, that you engaged in reckless behavior and that you should have known better. You basically possess mens rea. Negligent, same baby. It's sort of let's say you come home, you're really tired, you have the baby in their car carrier, and then you bring the baby in the car carrier. You just stopped at the grocery store. You come in the house. You've got groceries in one hand. You got the baby carrier in the other. You set the baby carrier on the counter, okay, and then you turn around to put the groceries into the refrigerator, right? And then the dog jumps up on the counter, knocks the babies off, and that they hit their head, right? That's negligent, right? It's sort of like, you were careless in what you were doing. That negligence, reckless, both of those are included in mens rea. And so reckless, more serious, it's gambling with the safety of others, and that if you are shown to engage in reckless behavior, and proven to have done that, then your punishment could be more severe. Now, in some instances, in some crimes, they're known as strict liability crimes. You don't actually have to prove that somebody possessed the guilty mind, okay? That somebody can be convicted just for engaging in the act, that you don't need to prove mens rea. And that is like written out in state and statute. All you have to do is that you need to prove that the individual engaged in that act. Why? Well, let me give you a concrete example, okay? A concrete example would be that the selling of cigarettes or alcohol to a minor, somebody who's underage, okay? Now, the state doesn't want underage people to have alcohol or tobacco. And so the thinking is that you don't have to prove that there was some intention to do that. In fact, that of course anybody who sells cigarettes or tobacco is going to say, I didn't know they looked like they were of age, right? Well, to make it so that the state can crack down more on preventing certain kinds of harms to children in particular, then you say, well, we don't have to actually prove mens rea. All we have to prove is actus reus. So the cigarette selling, the tobacco selling, the alcohol selling, those are all good examples. Statutory rape is also strict liability. You don't have to prove that somebody intended to have sex with a teenager. It's just having sex with somebody who's underage is a crime in and of itself. Okay, so how does a prosecutor prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual charged with the crime possessed mens rea? How do they prove intent? Well, there's many different ways that you can do this. Here are just some examples. One is you can show that the accused talked to others about engaging in the act, right? That they were thinking about doing this. And in fact, they told other people that they were considering engaging in this act, okay? That shows that they were thinking about it, that when they engaged in this guilty act, that they possessed the guilty mind because they shared that guilty mind, their intent with others. That you could also say that somebody had intention, they knew what they were doing, that they possessed mens rea because they took actions to prevent being caught, right? And so, in other words, that if you can demonstrate that somebody understood the consequences of their actions, then they basically knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing was crime, that it was wrong, right? And so, if you're intending to kill somebody and then you bar the doors to prevent people from coming in and helping with that injured person, that indicates that they knew what they were doing, they understood the consequences of their action, they possessed mens rea. They had a motive, right? There was a reason for what they were doing, right? That they knew that if they did this, they would get something, right? You kill your wife, you kill your husband, yeah, get the estate, right? If you prove motive, that brings you closer to proving the guilty mind. And if you've engaged in this behavior before, particularly as it relates to reckless behavior, right? You knew what you were doing, you did it before, harm happened, you did it again, right? And so that it shows that there's some sort of intention there, okay? This is not an exhaustive list of proving beyond a reasonable doubt the guilty mind, but these are common things that a prosecutor will focus on in order to prove mens rea. All right, so the prosecutor has proved beyond a reasonable doubt actus reus. They've proved mens rea. What next? Well, the next thing they need to do is they need to prove causation. What that means is that the prosecutor needs to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused conduct is the proximate cause of the harm that was the result of the criminal act, okay? That's a big mouthful. We'll pull that apart in a second. A couple of things to talk about. So the word proximate cause means that the accused actions, their conduct, that it was in close relationship to the harm that came about, okay? And so that the harm is the result of the criminal act, and it's the person who's charged with the crime, that they're the ones who are in close relationship to like committing that harm, being responsible for that harm. Let me give you some concrete examples, okay? Here's absolute cause, okay? And so this is, the prosecutor would easily be able to demonstrate that this is the absolute cause, okay, that the criminally accused. So criminally accused Chris shoots Sandy. Sandy dies, okay? There's no doubt that Chris's criminal act, shooting a gun into somebody's chest, there's no doubt that that was the proximate cause of the harm, right? The death, okay? Absolute cause. This is also absolute cause. Let's say that Chris robs Sandy, okay? And then Sandy runs in the street to escape being robbed, and then Sandy is hit by a car and dies, okay? That is also absolute cause. Why? Because Chris's criminal action, the criminal act of robbing somebody, is in close relationship to the harm that Sandy experienced, because Chris caused Sandy to run into the street and got hit by a car. That's absolute causation. The other, this is where it's not quite absolute. And this is, well, it's a possible cause. And a good prosecutor might be able to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's say that Chris robs Sandy. Sandy is very, very frightened by the robbery. And then later that day, Sandy, who had cardiovascular disease, dies of a heart attack, okay? I think a good prosecutor could prove causation in that. They could say that the robbery that Chris engaged in was in close relationship to the heart attack because the person who was robbed had a heart condition. One that's not likely a cause, but maybe a good prosecutor could still prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's say that Chris robs Sandy. Sandy is really frightened. They go home, and later in the day, Sandy's electrocuted by a toaster, okay? So let's say that Sandy's really scared and goes home and then starts cooking some toast in a toaster, and then they're shaking, and then let's say that they accidentally knock over a glass of water, and then they get electrocuted by the toaster. Not so sure that's in close relationship to the robbery, but it could be, okay? But at least it gives you a sense of that third element of what a prosecutor must prove. Okay, so the last element of the crime is harm, okay? And so it's not the intended nature of the harm that drives the crime that somebody is charged with, but it's the actual harm that determines the crime. So you have to prove that the person's actions is in proximate relationship to the actual harm, right? But it's the harm itself, not the intended harm, that determines what the crime or the charge is going to be. So going back to the previous example, Chris intended to rob Sandy. Chris didn't intend to kill Sandy, but in fleeing the robbery, Sandy ran into traffic and died. And so it's the actual harm that determines the charge, not the intent. And so in that case, Chris would be charged with manslaughter, not robbery. Goes the other way too. So let's say that Chris actually intended to murder Sandy through poisoning, okay? But let's say Chris wasn't good at measuring poison, and so Sandy got sick but didn't die. And so Chris would be charged not with murder, but with attempted murder, okay? Okay, so just to summarize the elements of the crime, that the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the accused engaged in actus reus, the criminal act, that they have to prove that the accused had the intent to commit the crime, that they possessed mens rea, the guilty mind, that is, that they knowingly and intentionally committed the crime. The prosecutor must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's action were the proximate cause of the harm, and that, in other words, that the action has to be in immediate or in close relationship with the harm or the injury. And they also have to prove that the actual harm was caused, okay? It's not the intent of the harm, but it's the actual harm that was caused that's going to drive what the charge will be and what the hopeful conviction will be from the prosecutor's perspective. Okay, that's it for this week. Next week, we're going to be learning about the criminal defenses, the excuse and the justification defenses. So we'll be looking at criminal law through the eyes of the defense attorney. And then we'll also be learning about procedural criminal justice. There'll also be an extra credit assignment next week where you can there's a case study where you can either choose to act like the prosecutor and prove that the individual is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, or you can provide defense for the individual who has been charged with the crime. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for listening and paying attention. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you again soon.